The Krath had watched Earth from the shadows for decades, waiting for the right moment to strike. Their intelligence had always told them that humanity was primitive, weak, barely able to survive in the vacuum of space. But their calculations had been wrong. The Krath saw only what they wanted to see: a planet full of squabbling nations, barely able to defend themselves from each other, much less the overwhelming might of a galactic empire. But they had no idea what kind of fire they were about to ignite on that day. The fleet arrived like a storm, bursting through the atmosphere, carrying through Earth's defenses with an ease that shocked even them. The first wave struck with unrelenting force. Cities fell to the ground in a matter of hours, entire populations wiped out in the blink of an eye. The human race was caught off guard by the suddenness of the attack. Nothing in their history could have prepared them for an invasion like this. Even the most advanced military forces could do little against the Krath's technological superiority. Their weapons tore through tanks and planes like paper. Only a few scattered units managed to put up a fight, but they were overwhelmed and crushed with brutal efficiency as the chaos unfolded across the globe. The Krath commanders believed they had already won. Their ships hovered over the planet's surface, raining down destruction. They broadcasted messages of fear, warning humanity that resistance would be futile. But they hadn't counted on one thing: humans never give up, no matter how impossible the odds. The news began to spread throughout the planet. Earth's governments scrambled to form a defense, but nothing seemed to work. The Krath were too advanced, too powerful. Nothing could stop them. It seemed as though all hope was lost. But in the darkest hour, a voice rose above the panic. Humans could always rise to face the impossible. When pushed to the edge, something inside them stirred. Captain Zaya stood before her command center in the distant colonies of Phaedra. Her hands gripped the edge of a table, the holographic map of Earth flickering before her. The news of the Krath attack had reached her on her Deathworld. Her home was a place where only the most resilient survived. She had survived volcanic eruptions, dust storms, and savage creatures that made the harshest Earth environments seem like paradise. Now she looked at the map with determination in her eyes. The Krath had underestimated humanity, but she wouldn't let that mistake slide through the cracks. Her voice echoed across the comm channels, calling to the scattered fleet of Deathworlders. Across the galaxy, every soldier, every warrior who had been forged in the most dangerous places of the universe came to the call. Her command was simple but clear: Earth was fighting for its survival, and she wasn't going to let it fall. No one could imagine the havoc a coalition of warriors from a dozen hostile planets could bring together, but Zaya knew they were humanity's last hope. She had seen them fight their way through environments that would have killed lesser species. They were humanity's true strength, not the fragile image the Krath had envisioned. They were Deathworlders, and they had no idea what kind of storm was about to strike back at them. The call was sent across the stars, a signal like none other. It echoed through the empty void to every corner of the galaxy, where humans had carved their place in the harshest environments. Captain Zaya knew what was at stake, and she would not let this be another lost battle. Earth needed help, and she was about to assemble the deadliest fleet humanity had ever seen. From worlds where the air could melt skin to deserts so dry that even water itself feared to exist, the Deathworlders responded one by one. From the frozen tundras of Valterra came Commander Harrow, whose soldiers fought through blizzards so fierce that the wind could tear flesh from bone. From the toxic jungles of Scythe 9 came General Taya, a master of navigating through acid rain and giant predatory creatures that had evolved to hunt her kind. From the shifting dunes of Gliese 46 came Sergeant Calderon, who had survived in the constant sandstorms of a desert planet and fought off giant sandworms that could swallow a tank whole. From the deep oceans of Orion 7 came Lieutenant Meko, who had learned to breathe underwater while battling sea monsters bigger than entire cities, each one a legend in their own right, and each one ready to stand with Zaya in the face of a threat none of them had ever imagined before. Together, they formed a coalition that was stronger than any army any empire had ever seen. Each soldier had fought in ways the Krath could not comprehend, had survived when every other species would have perished. They knew death, but they also knew how to overcome it. When the fleet had finally gathered in the dark of space, they were ready. Their warships were a hodgepodge of different designs, old and new, but they were built to survive the impossible. The engines hummed to life as Zaya stood on the bridge of her flagship. She didn't need to speak. The others understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about fighting an enemy. It was about showing the galaxy that Earth would not bend, would not break. The craft thought they could wipe out humanity, but they were wrong. Humanity would make them regret the day they ever set foot on Earth. The Deathworlders had trained for this moment. Their survival depended on adapting to environments that would destroy most of the galaxy's species, and now they would use that same adaptability to strike at the craft in ways they could never predict. The first step was simple. They would start small, a series of hit-and-run raids on craft supply lines, cripple their forces, while giving Earth time to build up resistance. Zaya gave the orders, and the fleet moved silently through the void. The craft might be overconfident, but they had no idea what was about to happen. Underestimating humans was a mistake the galaxy would soon learn to regret. It didn't matter how many ships the craft had or how many weapons they had built for destruction, because the Deathworlders had something the craft didn't. They had the will to fight to the bitter end. They had the strength of a species who had thrived in the face of death itself. And as the fleet moved toward their first target, Captain Zaya allowed herself a moment of calm in the storm ahead. This was only the beginning. Soon the craft would feel what it truly meant to face the might of humanity. The Deathworlder fleet moved like a shadow through the vastness of space, their ships designed to blend in with the stars themselves, each vessel a work of practicality over grandeur. The craft might have underestimated humanity, but they had no idea what they were about to face. The first strike was planned meticulously. The Deathworlders targeted one of the craft's supply convoys, a massive fleet of transport ships moving through a forgotten sector far from craft-controlled space. They had no idea the humans were already lying in wait, hidden in asteroid fields and dark nebulae. The Deathworlders knew how to use their environment as an ally, how to exploit the smallest advantage, and the craft were about to learn the hard way just how dangerous this new enemy truly was. Captain Zaya stood at the helm of her flagship, her eyes fixed on the holographic map. As the fleet closed in on the convoy, the craft were moving slowly under the assumption that nothing could touch them in this remote region of space. But the Deathworlders had a different plan. Zaya issued the order, and the fleet moved in like a sudden thunderstorm. A barrage of missiles struck the craft transports before they could even react. The Deathworlders knew exactly where to hit first, disabling the smaller ships with precision strikes that left the craft forces scrambling to respond. The surprise was overwhelming. The craft had no time to react. They didn't understand how these humans could be so unpredictable, how they could appear out of nowhere and hit them with such ferocity. The Deathworlders had honed their skills on planets where survival was a constant struggle, on worlds where every day could be their last, and that experience was paying off now as the craft's once proud convoy descended into chaos. Their ships turned into burning wrecks as the Deathworlders targeted their engines and weapons systems, leaving them vulnerable and exposed. The craft tried to fight back, launching fighter crafts from their remaining ships, but the Deathworlder fleet was already on the move. They had anticipated this and had already set up their countermeasures. The Deathworlders struck from above, below, and from all angles, using tactics that were as disorienting as they were deadly. They knew how to push an enemy to the edge of panic, and once the craft were rattled, they turned the fight into a slaughter. The craft scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Their supply lines were severed, their reinforcements too far away to help. The Deathworlders cut through them like a hot knife through butter. Every craft ship that tried to flee was chased down and destroyed one by one. In the chaos, the craft realized they had made a grave mistake. They had thought humanity was weak, thought they could subjugate a planet full of simple creatures. But now they were learning that Earth's inhabitants weren't as helpless as they had assumed. As the last of the craft ships fell silent, the Deathworlder fleet regrouped, their mission a complete success. The fleet had taken minimal damage, and the craft had lost a significant portion of their supply chain. The Deathworlders had shown the craft that no matter how big their fleet was, they were not invincible. The fight for Earth had only just begun, but this victory sent a clear message. The Deathworlders weren't going to back down. They weren't going to stop until the craft learned the hard way that Earth wasn't just a planet to conquer, it was a planet to be reckoned with. The craft high command had not anticipated this level of resistance. Their arrogance had blinded them to the one thing they never considered: the sheer unpredictability and adaptability of humanity. The loss of their supply fleet was a blow they hadn't expected to take. For weeks, the Krath had planned with precision, moving their forces as if they were steps ahead. Yet the Deathworlders had proven them wrong. They now realized that the humans had more tricks up their sleeves than they could comprehend. The Krath quickly regrouped, their pride bruised but their hunger for victory unyielding. They responded with anger, sending their most dangerous weapons to crush Earth's resolve once and for all. The Krath unleashed a terrifying weapon, a biological plague, one that had been developed in secret and designed specifically to decimate entire populations with ease. This weapon, however, wasn't just an assault on the human body. It was a direct strike at their spirits, a test of how much humanity could endure before surrendering. The disease was airborne, spreading rapidly across Earth's cities, causing untold suffering. The Krath broadcasted their success with a chilling message, warning humanity that if they didn't submit, the plague would continue to spread until there was nothing left. Yet the Deathworlders remained unshaken. While the rest of the world struggled to deal with the pandemic, Zaya's fleet had already anticipated such a move. They had studied Krath tactics for weeks, learning about their biological warfare, and had prepared a countermeasure. The Deathworlders, with their unmatched resilience to harsh environments, began distributing the antidote they had engineered, made from the very resources the Krath had believed they could exploit for their victory. Humanity's ingenuity shone through in this moment, turning the Krath's own weapon into a tool for survival. Meanwhile, Zaya and her commanders moved swiftly to address the greater threat. The Krath were not just after Earth's cities, they were after control of the planet's resources, of humanity itself. The attack had been calculated to break human morale, to weaken Earth's resolve. Yet it had done the opposite. It had strengthened it. In a desperate attempt to break the human resistance, the Krath launched their elite war beasts, massive creatures genetically engineered for destruction, capable of overwhelming entire military battalions in moments. These beasts were the Krath's final attempt to assert dominance over Earth, but what they didn't know was that humanity's Deathworlders had already dealt with creatures far more terrifying in their own environments. Zaya led a special force deep into Krath-held territory, targeting the warbeasts' breeding grounds. The mission was dangerous, and the terrain was hostile, lush, uncharted jungles filled with carnivorous plants and creatures that could tear through metal with ease. Yet the Deathworlders, accustomed to even worse, moved with precision, dismantling the Krath's breeding facilities. The warbeasts were taken down one by one in skirmishes that would have seemed impossible to outsiders. As the Deathworlders eliminated the Krath's biological terror, the world watched. Humanity had been pushed to the brink, but it was clear to all that they would never surrender. The Krath's brutal tactics had failed, their biological weapons neutralized, and their pride shattered by human ingenuity. The tide was turning. The Krath, once certain of victory, were now forced to reconsider their strategy. They had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to survive, and to fight back with everything they had. The Krath generals began to panic, their once unified empire now divided in the face of human resilience. Zaya knew this battle wasn't over, not by a long shot, but the message was clear. Humanity had struck back, and the Krath would learn to fear the very species they had once thought of as prey. The Krath were beginning to feel the pressure. What had once seemed like an inevitable conquest now felt like a struggle they weren't prepared for. The Deathworlders' resilience, their unexpected victories, and their ability to adapt to the harshest environments had shaken the Krath to their core. What they had thought would be a quick and decisive war had turned into an exhausting fight for survival, one that they were now losing. Every attempt to break humanity had been met with failure, and every victory humanity achieved made their resistance stronger. In the darkened war rooms of the Krath command, desperation set in. Their biological weapons had failed. Their warbeasts had been eradicated. Their supply lines were in tatters. The once mighty fleet was now crippled, and their forces were scattered across the globe, unable to regroup. Their arrogance had blinded them to one simple truth: they had underestimated the will of humanity. The craft leadership convened in secret, now fully aware that they could not defeat Earth by force alone. The decision was made to offer humanity a truce, a peace that would allow them to survive, at least for now. The message was clear: surrender or face total annihilation. The craft would offer Earth everything they had: resources, technology, and an end to the conflict, if humanity would simply bow to their will. It was a desperate move, but one that the craft had no choice but to make. They had lost the initiative, and they needed to find a way to salvage their pride before Earth's forces struck a final blow. The offer came swiftly. A delegation of craft emissaries landed on Earth, broadcasting a message to every human government. The message was straightforward: humanity could join the craft empire and live in peace, or they could face destruction. The craft would spare Earth's civilians and resources, and all they asked for in return was total surrender. It was a tempting offer to some, especially those who had seen the devastation firsthand. The craft's words were smooth, their promises laced with power. They spoke of a future where humanity could thrive, but only under craft control. Back on Earth, the response was mixed. Some leaders, desperate to end the suffering and chaos, saw this as their only chance to save their people. Others, particularly the military leaders who had fought tooth and nail to protect Earth, saw it as nothing more than a trap. They had fought too hard, sacrificed too much, to give in now. The message from the Deathworlder commanders was clear: surrendering was not an option. Captain Zaya was among those who were steadfast in their refusal to capitulate. She had seen what the craft were capable of, what they had already done to her people. She knew that if Earth surrendered, it would never see freedom again. The craft would destroy everything that made humanity unique, and the galaxy would be nothing more than another conquered world in their empire. Humanity had always fought for its survival, and Zaya would be damned if she would let the craft destroy that spirit. Zaya convened with the other Deathworlder commanders, their faces grim but resolute. The message from the craft was nothing more than a lie designed to break them, and they wouldn't allow it to work. They would not bow to anyone, especially not to an alien race that thought it could dictate Earth's fate. Instead, they would take the fight to the heart of the craft empire and show the craft exactly what they were dealing with. A counteroffer was prepared, one that would make the craft tremble. Earth would not surrender. It would strike back with everything it had. Zaya's eyes narrowed as she looked over the plans. The war was far from over, but the tide was shifting. The craft had made a grave mistake by underestimating humanity. The Deathworlder fleet was about to teach them just how badly they had miscalculated. The craft emissaries were waiting in Earth's capital for a response to their offer. Their arrogance was evident, their posture one of quiet confidence, as if they truly believed humanity could be swayed by their words. They had no idea that Earth's leadership was already preparing a counteroffensive, one that would cripple the craft once and for all. The Deathworlders had made it clear: they would not surrender. They would not bend to the will of an alien empire, no matter how powerful it claimed to be. In the quiet of the military command centers, plans were being drawn up. Zaya and her commanders knew the stakes now. This wasn't just a battle for survival. This was a fight to send a message to the galaxy that humanity would never be a subjugated race. The craft had been foolish enough to underestimate human resolve, and they would pay the price for it. But the plan would take time, and time was something Earth didn't have in abundance. The craft were growing impatient. They wanted results, and they wanted them now. Earth's response to their peace offer was inevitable. It would be one of defiance, but that defiance had to be more than words. It had to be backed by action. Zaya stood before the war room's holographic table, her hand resting on the edge, the map of craft-controlled space shimmering before her. The Deathworlder fleet was already on high alert, ready to launch a massive assault on the craft's central stronghold. The plan was to hit the craft where it would hurt most: their capital, their heart. If Earth could cripple their command and communication systems, it would throw the entire Krath Empire into disarray. The Krath had been overconfident, but this would shatter their illusion of invincibility. It was a calculated risk, but one that had to be taken. With the fleet's preparation underway, the Krath emissaries were told to return to their ships without ceremony. Their demands for surrender were rejected outright. They were given no further audience. It was a simple but powerful message. The humans would never bow to their invaders. Zaya's fleet would strike in the heart of Krath space. It would be a daring raid, one that no one would expect. But the Deathworlders weren't just fighters. They were survivors. And the time for diplomacy was over. In the days that followed, Earth's military leadership continued to prepare for what would be the final stage of this brutal war. The Deathworlder fleet moved into position in secret, using every trick at their disposal to avoid detection. They had learned the Krath's tactics, their weaknesses, and now they would exploit them with ruthless efficiency. Every ship, every weapon, every strategy had been designed to strike swiftly and decisively. There was no room for failure. Zaya and her commanders were fully aware that this would be the last chance to turn the tide. The final assault plan was simple, a multi-pronged attack aimed directly at the Krath capital. While the bulk of the fleet would draw the Krath's attention in a frontal assault, a smaller force would slip through the back door, striking at the heart of Krath communications and command centers. The Deathworlders had done the impossible before, and they would do it again. The Krath had not only attacked Earth, they had attacked the very spirit of humanity. And Zaya knew the time had come to make them pay for their mistake. The Deathworlders had no intention of playing by the Krath's rules. The entire Krath Empire was about to learn that humanity could not be crushed by fear, by plague, or by war beasts. The real weapon humanity wielded was its unyielding will to fight and to protect everything it held dear. And now, as the fleet prepared for its final push, Earth's warriors were ready to show the Krath exactly what it meant to face a species that had no intention of being conquered. The fleet was ready. Every ship in the Deathworlder armada had been meticulously prepared, every soldier poised for action. Zaya stood at the helm of her flagship, her gaze unwavering as the final preparations unfolded around her. The tension was palpable, thick in the air like an approaching storm. She could feel the weight of every decision, every life that would be on the line in the coming hours. The Krath had underestimated humanity, and they would soon learn how costly that mistake had been. Zaya's fleet, composed of beings from the most hostile and dangerous planets in the galaxy, was unlike any force the Krath had ever faced. They had endured the harshest environments known to existence, and now they would bring that same strength and survival instinct to the heart of Krath-controlled space. As the fleet powered up, the stars outside the viewport blurred into streaks of light, a testament to the sheer speed with which they were moving. The target was clear: the Krath capital, a fortress planet that sat at the center of their empire. It was the beating heart of the Krath's power, and destroying it would cripple their entire military structure. The Krath would lose their command, their coordination, and most importantly, their morale. The attack would come in waves. First, a massive diversion to draw the Krath's forces out. Then a small elite team of Deathworlders would infiltrate the capital itself, taking out the command center and destabilizing their entire operation. The first wave of ships, a large contingent of the fleet, surged forward with incredible speed. Zaya's flagship led the charge, its sleek form cutting through the darkness of space like a knife. The Krath forces, overconfident after years of dominance, didn't see it coming. Their intelligence had missed the quiet movement of the fleet, the careful coordination of the Deathworlders. The Krath scrambled to respond, but it was too late. As soon as the first blast hit, the Krath's carefully laid plans began to unravel. Explosions rocked the outer defenses of the capital planet as Zaya's forces engaged in a fierce bombardment. The Krath retaliated with their own heavy weapons, but their disarray was obvious. They hadn't anticipated this kind of precision strike. Every missile fired from the Deathworlder ships hit its mark with devastating accuracy. The Krath defense systems, once thought impregnable, were swiftly dismantled by the skilled pilots and warriors of the Deathworld fleet. But this was only the opening act. Zaya's true objective lay on the planet itself. As the larger fleet continued to engage the craft forces above the planet, a smaller elite team led by General Tyed descended into the planet's atmosphere. Their stealth ships slipping through the chaos unnoticed. They would infiltrate the Krath command center, located deep within the capital's massive citadel. The mission was high risk. If the team failed, it would mean the loss of their entire strike force. But the Deathworlders had faced impossible odds before, and they were willing to die for this. Inside the capital, the Krath command was in disarray. The first signs of the attack had come too quickly, and their military leaders struggled to adapt. Panic had begun to spread through the ranks as the Deathworlder fleet tore through their outer defenses. The High Command, once secure in their invincibility, now found themselves scrambling to regroup, their systems faltering under the onslaught. In the heart of the capital, the Deathworlders moved with brutal efficiency. Taya's team cut through the Citadel's defenses, their weapons lethal and precise. Each step brought them closer to their objective, the heart of Krath power. Back in orbit, Zaya knew this was the turning point. The Krath were reeling from the surprise assault, their pride shattered by the fierce retaliation of the Deathworlders. As the final waves of the fleet arrived, and the planet's defenses crumbled, Zaya made the call. The Krath had lost. The Deathworlders had shown them the true power of humanity's will to survive, to fight, and to never surrender. The Krath capital was falling. The once imposing citadel that had stood as a symbol of their empire's strength was now a crumbling monument to their arrogance. Inside the heart of the command center, chaos reigned. The Krath military leaders were desperate, scrambling to salvage what they could, but it was too late. The Deathworlders were unstoppable. General Taya's team had already breached the inner sanctum, taking down the last of the Krath's elite guards with ruthless precision. They moved with the efficiency of predators, and their every step seemed to echo the determination that had driven humanity to fight back. Zaya's flagship loomed in orbit, its guns still firing as the last of the Krath defenses were obliterated. The fleet had done its job. The Krath forces in space were in retreat, their communications severed, their command structure in shambles. But Zaya knew that the real victory would come from the ground, the heart of the Empire, the very soul of the Krath. Back on the capital, Taya's team had reached the central command room. There, the Krath High Command had gathered, huddled together, trying to make sense of the disaster unfolding around them. But they were no longer in control. The Deathworlders had shattered their illusion of invincibility, and now their empire was crumbling before them. Taya stood at the door of the command center, her breath steady, her weapon in hand. The Krath generals turned, their faces pale as they realized the inevitable. There would be no more negotiations. There would be no mercy. The Deathworlders had come for them, and they had brought hell with them. Without saying a word, Taya motioned to her team, and they swept into the room. The Krath generals tried to resist, but it was futile. The Deathworlders were trained to fight and kill in the most hostile environments imaginable, and these Krath were nothing more than a weakened shell of their former might. The final blow came swiftly. The Krath leaders, once so proud and confident in their power, now knelt before their conquerors, pleading for mercy. But mercy was a commodity that the Deathworlders did not offer. Zaya's voice came over the comms, cold and resolute. The galaxy will remember this day. The Krath will not enslave humanity. You made a mistake, and now you will pay for it. With that, the Krath Empire collapsed. The Deathworlders had taken their revenge, not with cruelty, but with the certainty that humanity would never again be subject to alien domination. As the Krath generals were taken into custody, the Deathworlder fleet began to withdraw from the capital's atmosphere, the fires of battle still burning behind them. Earth's forces had won, against all odds, against the might of a galactic empire that had thought them weak. The news spread across the planet, and a wave of relief and triumph washed over humanity. Cities that had been torn apart by the Krath invasion now began to rebuild, the first signs of a new era. The Deathworlders had led the charge, and humanity had stood side by side with them, showing the galaxy that they were not a species to be underestimated. As Zaya looked out at the stars from her flagship, a quiet smile crossed her face. The war was over, but the message was clear. The Krath had learned the hard way that humanity could not be crushed, could not be enslaved. No matter how powerful an enemy might be, no matter how insurmountable the odds, Earth would always find a way to fight back. And as the Deathworlders returned to their homes, they knew that the galaxy would never forget the day when humanity rose up, and the mighty Krath learned what it meant to face a species that had no fear.